and works at the library on Swan's Island. Visiting here, but he had this great adventure where he found this mammoth skeleton that was instrumental in proving that that's what it was. So you don't need to hear that from me. You need to hear that from him without further ado. Gary, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
There we go.
Okay.
I just heard a comment from somebody online that it was hard to hear Mel, so I guess.
That may be because I was masked.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Well, we'll try this out and see
Yeah.
what happens.
And I can turn the lights out too, or change this light on.
Okay.
You still see your notes, Gary?
I don't have any problem with the notes, but I'm not having any luck changing the slides. Yeah. Technical difficulty.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Well, as Mel said, I've never gotten rich, but I've had a lot of fun. Put it that way. I actually felt that I had the greatest job in state government, and not because I was paid a lot of money, but because I continually went to work to play, and I had these wonderful experiences. But one experience that I had is what I want to share with you tonight. And I wrote a book about it, Mystery Tusk. Now, the original title was Searching for Elephants in the Maine Woods. But my publisher said, can you kind of condense this to maybe 2 or 3 words? And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, okay, what about Mystery Tusk? And so that's what we went with, Mystery Tusk. And I'm glad we did, because Mystery Tusk pretty much typifies the whole story. And maybe I should stand a little closer.
Yeah,
here.
maybe turn it back on. Yeah. There you go. That's fine.
All right. Okay. Well, anyway, Mystery Tusk is kind of like one of these Russian dolls. There's a doll within a doll within a doll. Every time we solved a mystery, it led to other mysteries. And so I want to share this with you. I heard about this, or Tusk, shortly after I completed this series, this exhibit right here, which took me actually 2 years to do, from gathering. This is an edible. It's a Native American edible plants case at the Maine State Museum, and all of these plants and parts of plants had to be created. Some of them made out of waxes, some of them made out of plastics, some of them made out of actually paper too. So this took me about 2 years to do, from collecting the specimens, making the molds and casts, doing the wire work, doing the cotton wrapping, coloring the waxes and all. And out of the success of this exhibit, which has about 50 different kinds of plants and well over 100 individual parts of plants, I was asked by a publisher to do an article on it for his publication in Oxford, England. So that's an international publication. Anyway, I had just finished this exhibit, and it was for an exhibit hall which was called 12,000 Years in Maine, which is an exhibit or a series of exhibits on the archaeology of Maine. The person heading up this hall, Bruce Bork, was a state archaeologist. And Bruce wanted to have an introductory exhibit that would draw people into this exhibit hall. And so he asked me if I could get involved in this. And I said, I'd be glad to. He said, now, I don't have time to get all these specimens, but you just finished this exhibit. So, you know, you got some time, you can do this. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. I knew some things were coming to the museum, but fossils of Ice Age specimens, because this basically was an Ice Age exhibit. However, I wanted some fossil specimens that really would draw people into the hall. Most of the Ice Age specimens that you find in Maine are like clamshells and maybe a few bones from seal clippers or something like that. Not the kind of thing that really draw people in. But I contacted a friend of mine, Woody Thompson, who worked at Maine Geological Survey. Woody had helped me out on a number of exhibits and collections in the past. For instance, we ended up getting a great series of specimens from Harvard University, thanks to Woody working with me and Carl Francis, who was at that time the curator of the museum there at Harvard. They were running out of room to keep the specimens. So they said, would you like our seconds? Which is like, wow, seconds from Harvard. Darn nice specimens. And they all came from Maine. You may not know this, but major museums seek out specimens from Maine. You'll find them not only at Harvard, but you'll also find them at the American Museum of Natural History. You'll find them at the Smithsonian. So every time I go to a mine to examine something, I was usually rubbing elbows with somebody from the Smithsonian or the American Museum of Natural History or some Carnegie or some of the other major museums. So that's just a little background that I want to talk to you about. Now, I asked Woody, I said, have you heard of any good fossil specimens in Maine? I said, you don't really want to show for an introductory exhibit of Maine fossils. We don't want to show out-of-state examples if we can help it. And so Woody was thinking, he said, you know, you get this one, that one, you got walrus skulls, and I had heard about those, and I knew that they would already be in accession for the Maine State Museum from elsewhere. But then as an afterthought, he said, well, you know, there's this tusk outside of Hal Bourne's office. Well, Hal was the head of the Institute of Quaternary Studies. Now, of course, everybody knows what that means. That department the name has been changed to the Climate Change Institute. It's located up at the University of Maine in Orem, and it's now in a modern building. But back then it was in another building. So, so he told me about this tusk, and he said supposedly it's from Scarborough, Maine, and he said don't really know much about it, but Hal got this from an old Portland collection, the Portland Museum of Natural History. Now, the Portland Museum of Natural History went defunct in 1970. Its collections went like everywhere. We don't even know all the repositories that took those collections. It merged with the Maine Audubon Society. So, but we did know that some of their collections were at the University of Maine, Presque Isle. Thanks to Bill Forbes, who brought a lot of this stuff from fossil specimens and geological specimens up to Presque Isle. And Hal's, so I went up and visited with Hal, and I saw this tusk up there. I thought, oh man, this has got to be the tusk, from Scarborough. It's going to look great, and in the exhibit, if the university goes along with this, which wasn't a real problem. But Hal said, there is a problem. He said, this tusk was in a crate with another tusk. Both of the tusks were labeled. The crate wasn't opened for over 10 years later. Guess what happened to the labels? They fell to the bottom of the crate. So nobody involved with the move knew which tusk was which. So I was hoping, well, it's got to be this one. It's got to be. It's such a great tusk. It's over 10 feet long. But we found out that it was a different tusk. But we also found out, as we went along, that we suspected it was dug up in the 1800s because we couldn't find any information on it. But I just so happened to know a reporter who would come into the museum on occasion because he was also involved in the legislature. And I asked him about, you ever heard of anything about a tusk being found in Scarborough, Maine? And he said, no, never heard anything about it. But he said, our newspapers are being cataloged right now. And he said, I'll take a look, see if I can find anything about it. So sure enough, he found a little mention of, back in August of 1959, 2 people digging up a mastodon tusk. So as soon as I heard that, I went down to the State Library, which is in the same building as the Maine State Museum, and I pulled up the newspapers through microfilm, and on September 1st, 1959, this was the photo on the front page. And there was a big question mark, prehistoric find, question mark. So here was a tusk that these fellows had found. And you can see these, looks like ribs behind them. And come to find out, this was a farm pond that was being dug at the time. And I've got the names, James Littlejohn and Leonard Cash. And so I went to the Greater Phone Book Directory in Portland, and sure enough, I found Littlejohn, but I did not find James. But I did find a William J. Littlejohn, so I thought, pretty likely he's a relative. So I called Littlejohn's, and let me just read you, because this really stuck in my mind. This is the forward to the book. And I said, hello, this is Gary Hoyle, I said into the telephone. I'm the Curator of Natural History at the Maine State Museum. I don't know if I have the right Littlejohn. Is it about the tusk? Sure enough. So that's how it all started out. And eventually we found out that the tusk was ancient. And the reason we get an idea that the tusk might be ancient, when I met with Mr. Littlejohn, because I showed him the photograph of the tusk that I had at the Maine State Museum. And he looked at that and said, that's not the one that they got. So I had a feeling that, well, it might be the other tusk. So I said, do you have anything else that might give us some clues about the tusk? And he said, yeah. He said, how did the tusk out of the ground? He said, it was in clay. And he said, there were seashells all around the tusk. And these are the kind of seashells they were. Little tiny clams. These little tiny clams are called Portlandia arctica. And they are now found where very cold water off glaciers is dumped into the ocean, along with sediments. So the only types of shellfish that can live in that kind of environment are Portlandia arctica and a few other different species. But this is in high abundance. And not only did he find single shells, but he found shells that were joined together, which tells me that they weren't swept in from somewhere else, that they were deposited right where they died. So we had an idea that we were dealing with something ancient. And this is the tusk. It got broken because when they tried to pull it up out of the mud, out of the clay, it was stuck solid in the clay. So Leonard Cash took his backhoe and he pulled on the tusk, and unfortunately it snapped off. So, when we got this tusk, of course, what we wanted to do was to get an accurate date on the tusk. So we did a radiocarbon, we sent off a radiocarbon dating. And I'll just, for any science buffs, I'll just say, I pulled out the analytical report, bone appetite, 10,125 years, plus or minus 650 radiocarbon years. Bone gelatin, 10,935 plus or minus 490 years of radiocarbon BP, which means before person. But anyway, so we proved it was ancient. And of course, eventually we got the tusk. I thought that it might be a mastodon because knowing the history of Maine, or the prehistory of Maine, I did know that as the glaciers retreated here in Maine, that there was considerable evidence that woodlands crept forward as the glacier retreated. So I didn't think there would be any time for any sizable grasslands to be available for another type of animal. Mastodons are known to have ingested browse, like deer browse, for instance. And so the thought was that this is a mastodon. Now, mastodon gets its name from the shape of the cusps on its teeth, and these raised cusps kind of take on the appearance of a breast, and that is the name of the mastodon. It is breast tooth, you know, mastectomy, breast, odont. Odont is tooth, so mastodon. Now, if I'm going to dig up a mammoth or a mastodon or whatever it is, I've got to have some training. I didn't have any training in digging things like that up. So I had to look around and see what was available at the time. I was in contact with people in Canada who had just dug up a mastodon in a calcareous bog deposit. But so they were giving me information on what they were doing. But I had to have hands-on experience. And I thought the best way of getting it is to sign up for dinosaur day in Montana. So I did. And so I spent a few weeks out there and sketched the landscape while I was out there too. And this is the kind of area that we were in at the time. And what we would do is we would walk along these canyons, and I'd have people above me and people below me, and we just walk along like a survey party, parallel along these canyons, which were actually part of an ancient river channel. And as we walked, if somebody saw some fragments of bones, they would holler out bone. We'd all stop, and then the director of the dig would go scurry up the slope and see if she could find where the bone was leaching out at the time. So we found some things like this jar of a plant-eating dinosaur, hadrosaur it's called, and some other interesting things like rattlesnakes. I was walking along like the side of the canyon, and all of a sudden I looked across, and I had a little gully that I had to hop across. And I get ready to hop across the gully, and I saw this thing that actually looked like a pile of cow manure, and I thought, what the heck is that? And then I realized it was a 4-foot furry rattlesnake that was all curled up there, and he happened to be looking the other way. And I thought, wow, geez, this is neat, because I've never experienced a rattlesnake before. So I took a pebble and I tossed it over the rattlesnake. Man, that head whipped around, the tongue, this black tongue came out. I thought, well, okay, I've got to find another way of getting around this. So anyway, but it was a great experience. There were also wildlife out there, things that were alive. And while getting briefed one morning, this sagebrush lizard climbed up onto my finger and sunned itself for the 20-minute talk. So eventually, I got the information that I needed, and we ended up doing the dig. And this is just a sketch of the dig with the different soil layers. Here's an area here of brown sediment, which is like a brown clay, and then down in here is a little area of gravel, and below that marine clay. And the people that did the dig back in 1959, Leonard Cash and William Littlejohn, who was the son of the James Littlejohn, worked in this area while Cash dug into the ground. William Bill would take a little bulldozer, and he would push everything aside until they found, of course, the tusk. And what they didn't realize that there were other things there. So, let me just read you. These are the skulls of walrus that are now at the Maine State Museum too, in the exhibit. That we got. During this process, there was a professor, a researcher who got in touch with me. He was very interested in what I was doing. Come to find out, he was on the original dig back in 1959 after these people found the Tusk. So he was a geologist at that time, and he was working at the site. So he was interested in what I was finding. So I shared some information with him, and then I said, well, you should talk with Bruce Moore, the archaeologist, to get an archaeological perspective on the site too. So left that to them, and sometime later, we had shared our radiocarbon dates and all with this geologist, and we invited him to join our team to reinvestigate the site. Fortunately, Leonard Cash and Bill Littlejohn knew exactly where the dig had taken place, the farm pond had been created. So we went to that area. We got permission to do a survey of it, and like I say, we did the dig. Well, in the process, we invited this researcher to join us, and he was considering it, and then he backed out and decided that he wasn't going to join the dig. But what he was going to do was publish our findings. Now, that's an ethical thing.
Yeah.
You don't do that. But he was going to do it, and so we had some heated arguments among ourselves about what to do about this. And we finally decided, let's not do anything. I mean, it's not worth getting into. So we didn't do anything about it, and so this individual showed up at the museum because he wanted to photograph the tusk. So I let him photograph the tusk, and fortunately, like I say, the mystery tusk opens up a new mystery, another mystery. The real mystery of this tusk is, how did this tusk get in clay that has seashells around it? Well, the weight of the glacier was a glacier. That glacier went throughout Canada. It covered Canada just almost completely, and went down as far as the Ohio Valley, went out as far as Long Island, and off the Maine coast, it went out to Georgia's Banks. So as it started melting back, here was a mass of ice that was 1.5 miles thick in Maine. In Canada, it was about 2 miles thick. That's a lot of weight on the crust of the earth. And so that depressed the earth's crust. So as it melted back, ocean water followed that melt. And even though the land rebounded, it took a lot longer to rebound than it took for the glacier to melt back. So consequently, there are places inland here that you can dig down, you can find some clay, and you'll find some shells in the clay. That's why. So we had talked with the people that had done a lot of the early work on glacial melt. And we found that the glacier, as it melted back and deposited all this grindings that occurred, was actually, here's an example of it right there. The melting back of the glacier. You probably recognize these hills, the bubbles. And this is what that looked like about 13,000 years ago. Now, there was a lot of rock grindings that became sediment that was washing out of the glacier into the ocean. And that would eventually be clay with some sand and gravel or rocks. So you get a mixture of stuff. But the ocean water would sift this stuff out. So you ended up with clay, and you also had these sand lenses. And so within these sand lenses, lots of times you would get the shells. So you get this combination of clay, and you've got the shells in the clay, and then another layer of clay. And within one of these layers of clay, or sand lenses, I should say, is where the tusk was found. So that told us, working on the project, that we had a problem, because this is 13,000 years old. And so if that's 13,000 years old and our tusk is only 10,000 years old, how the heck did that tusk get in there? Another mystery. So we thought, well, the best way to do that, check that out, is to do another radiocarbon dating on it. And so we did, and it ended up, once we did the cleaning of it, we went through a whole process of cleaning this to send it off. And once we get the radiocarbon date, it proved to be much older than the original radiocarbon dates. So the researcher that gave our dates to the American Geological Society was an error. So anyway, we won in the end. Here I am with a 7.5 pound tooth. This gentleman here, one of my favorite volunteers, Jim Story, is the one that found it in the back earth of the digging the pond. So what had happened is the guys that were digging the pond actually dug through some of the mammoth before they discovered the tusk. So if it wasn't for that tusk, nobody'd ever know anything about that. So we proved it was a mammoth. We've also proved it was a female mammoth. And she looked something like this. And the landscape looked a little bit like that too. This, by the way, is a short-faced bear. Also, some geologists call it grizzly on stilts. So it had long legs. So. And now, let's check this. Shortly afterwards, the Native Americans were starting to move into this area, and they had been around for probably 1,000 years even before. But because of the the massive ice in Maine at the time, was no need for a lot of these to Native Americans to move up into the state. But as the ice melted back, then of course there were animals that they could hunt, and sure enough, some of these animals were depleted by environmental change as well as hunting pressure. So combination of the two. And as time advanced, then people began to use what they found in nature from these animals to either construction of their settlements or ornamentation too. And they continued to follow the herds, nomadic way. The settlements were never permanent. Oops, excuse me. I went too far. But there was another story about this tusk that people in 1959, even geologists, gravitated to. And that was a modern day elephant. And they thought the tusk was actually from a modern day elephant because they'd heard about this elephant that had been shot and killed in Scarborough, Maine. And, excuse me, not Scarborough, but in Elford, Maine. And it was only the second elephant to have come into North America. And this gentleman here purchased the elephant as soon as it came off the boat in Boston Harbor. This was 1804. And this gentleman here was known for being a showman, so he would show the elephant. Eventually, a farmer purchased this elephant. The first elephant that came into the country, by the way, was purchased by, I believe it was a farmer, who ended up showing his elephant, and he purchased that elephant for $10,000.
Wow.
And this was in 1796. Yeah. So he made money on the elephant, but this second purchase in 1804 was for $1,000. And anyway, this guy kept this elephant for a period of time, and finally he couldn't keep it any longer because he was a captain of merchant vessels, and he had been shipping out of New York Harbor. But in 1818, he ended up having his vessel stranded off Bermuda, and the British confiscated what he had in the ship, and they wouldn't release him until about a half a year later. So he got back to New York and just decided that he'd had it with New York. And so he was shipped out of Baltimore after that, which would take him south of Bermuda. So he had to get rid of some things. And one thing he had to get rid of was an elephant. So he sold the elephant to a farmer. And I don't want to get to that yet, but he sold the elephant to a farmer, and the farmer ended up purchasing the elephant for the same amount that this fellow had paid for. So it cost the farmer $1,000. Now this farmer was a smart guy. He got people to travel with the elephant, and they traveled by night. And then he rent out a barn and he'd sell tickets to see the elephant. So he traveled throughout the country. In the wintertime, he would take the elephant down south and travel through the southern states, and then he'd bring it up in the spring. And so he did a very successful business. He was making, I think he was making something like $1,000 a year or 3,000, something like that. So he was making quite a lot of money, doing very well. And then in 1816, there was this young fellow that had formed a road troop, and he was a tightrope walker, and he was very, very good doing a tightrope act. And so he thought that maybe he could get the elephant too to show. So I made arrangements with the owner of the elephant, and sure enough, they were going to travel into the District of Maine before Maine was a state. Now there's a problem here, another mystery, okay? And that is that this year, 1816, if you know anything about Maine history, 1816 was also known as the year there was no summer, or 1800 and froze to death, in other words. Okay. 1815 may not mean much to you, but this is what happened in 1815. This is about a mountain called Tambora. It had had an eruption, and people down below the volcano were very concerned about their crops and everything. So they were cleaning off their crops and said the worst seemed over, and people from the village of Sangar, near the base of Mount Tambora, rushed to clean away ash from the crops before they smothered. As the day ended on April 10th, they left the fields relieved that their plants had survived and unaware the gates of hell would soon open around them. 3 blasts were recorded from this volcano. Said 40 miles eastward of the volcano in the town of Bima, a resident claimed that the blast was like the report of a heavy mortar close to his ear. In a short time, the whole mountain appeared like a body of liquid fire, extending itself in every direction. Darkness caused by the quantity of falling ash obscured it at about 8 o'clock. Stones at that time fell very thick, and some of them as large as 2 fists. Between 9 and 10 p.m., ash began to fall. Superheated air above the Earth's rupture rose so quickly that a vacuum formed at its surface, drawing a thunderous rush of air to fill the void. A violent whirlwind ensued, tearing up roots of the largest trees and carrying them into the air together with men, houses, cattle, and whatever else came under its influence. There's more descriptions here, but I don't want to read them to you right now. But just a few days after the April 10th eruption, the ash cloud spread to the size of Australia, chilling the air in places to temperate levels. 1 to 3 feet of ash deposited over the western side of the island chains. This was a chain in the Malaysian Peninsula. From then the famine began. From the direct blast to the end of Tambora's-induced famine, upwards of 100,000 people died. Untold fish and wildlife also. The eruption is considered the greatest volcanic event in the last 10,000 years. The mountain went from a height of roughly 14,000 feet to a little less than 9,000 feet, ejecting 9.8 cubic miles of volcanic debris and leaving a crater 3.7 to 4.3 miles across and 2,000 to 2,300 feet deep. The ash cloud reached an estimated height of 144,000 feet, where the finer particles and sulfurous gases dispersed, affecting climate worldwide, most significantly in 1816, when the elephant journeyed into the District of Maine. So the elephant came to Maine at that very bad time. And this is what happened in 1816. This is a poem that was written shortly after. Months that should be summer prime, sleet and snow and frost and brine, air so cold you could see your breath, 1800 froze to death. In 1816, the spring approached summer. The weather got no better and became more than inconvenience. In June 6, a snowstorm was reported in Lubec. 9 to 12 inches of that fell over the Down East region. In Freiburg, a western Maine town hugging the New Hampshire border, an unknown diarist described the conditions in June. Frost and ice were common, and every green thing was killed. All fruit was destroyed. As they flew into Maine, migratory birds found a landscape nearly barren of insects and any form of fresh plant life. Depleted of their energy reserves, starvation and cold shock brought them tumbling in from the wilted vegetation in thousands. People picked up the still living jewels, hummingbirds, warblers, martins, and scarlet tanagers. They held them close to provide warmth. Elisha Clark even brought in Baltimore Orioles from his China, Maine orchard to warm them at the wood stove. But all the acts of compassion only delayed deaths at most for a few days. Revival spread like a grass fire across New England. Some churches, congregations grew even without a minister present. But as the summer wore on, people butchered their starving animals as a merciful death and to save themselves. They became so despondent that one elderly farmer who could no longer stand the baying of his starving cattle slaughtered them and then hanged himself. So things were mighty tough in Maine back then. Well, the elephant was eventually shot by a farmer, and I'm not going to tell you why that happened, but so this farmer actually ended up being very wealthy for this regarding this elephant, because he insured the elephant. He ended up getting $30,000 from the insurance on the elephant, which made him purchase 2 other elephants. So anyway, he did very well. And as he got older, he liked to spend a little time down in Bethel, Connecticut, which was away, not too far away from where he lived in Somers, New York. So anyway, the following year, this is after the elephant was killed, while in Bethel, Connecticut, this farmer happened upon a recently opened confectionery and fruit store run by an affable 18-year-old proprietor. The establishment was rapidly becoming a local gathering place where beer and oysters nurtured hearty conversation, pranks, and hilarity. The farmer felt at home and when in the area visited the store as often as he could. He loved to reminisce about his escapades with his elephant, and each tale enthralled the young store owner, Phineas Taylor Barnum. So there's quite a lot of information in this little book if you're interested in it. If anyone wants to buy it tonight, I'd be glad to sign copies. And that's done. The end of my presentation. I don't know if any people have any questions or not. I'd be glad to answer.
Why did he shoot the elephant?
That I can tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you. Let's see, how do I explain this? The process that they would go through in showing this elephant is that they would sell these ginger biscuits. And you put the ginger biscuit in your pocket, and the elephant would come up to you, and he'd start swirling around for that biscuit. And this fellow decided he wasn't going to buy a biscuit. Instead, he was going to take some tobacco and give it to the elephant. Well, this elephant had had experience in the past with tobacco. Didn't like this stuff. And and I have documentation in the book that actually specifies what had happened in the past with this elephant. So anyway, this guy was going to give the back of the elephant, and the people that were showing the elephant found out about it, and they threw him out of the barn. So he got all mad, and he decided that he was going to take care of that elephant. Sure enough, he hid behind some bushes when they were moving the elephant to another town, and he shot the elephant. And the elephant ran down the road for a little ways, spewing blood, and eventually fell over and died. But that's not the end of the story. I'll give you a hint. There was a double resurrection. So if you want to find out about the double resurrection, you gotta read the book.
Was that in Scarborough? He died in Scarborough?
No, he died in Alfred, and the theory was that people would be so fascinated by this dead elephant that they could move it to up to Portland and show the remains of the elephant, and then when it started to rot, they'd throw it into this gully. So they had their own idea about what this all was. They didn't want to hear anything about radiocarbon dating, you can't trust that stuff, So so they had it all figured out. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, the archaeology stuff is fascinating. So thank you. Thank you for your presentation tonight. Very good. And also very impressive artistry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Especially the style with the black and white and charcoal. Just very, very unique style. Congratulations. Going back to the elephants.
Sure.
Asian elephants? They look like
Yeah, this is it. This I explain in the book too. The elephants came from those two elephants came from two different countries. The first one came from India, and the second one came from Africa. Now, the wonderful thing about that is the tusks are different. When the female Asian elephant has very short tusks, and in most cases, you don't see them unless you really look, and you can see, they're just kind of sticking out a little bit. But the African elephant females have pretty good sized tusks. Not as large as the male, but they're still pretty good.
And $10,000 bring it over the first time? Did that seem exorbitant when you did that research, or?
Let me read you. Find that real quick. should have, here we go. Okay. This is directly from a letter that was written in 1795. And this is written by Jacob Crowninshield, who was transporting the elephant to America. Says, we take home a fine young elephant, 2 years old, at $450. I dare say we shall get it home safe. If so, it will bring at least $5,000. Well, it ended up bringing $10,000.
Just leave it on. It's just, I want to be respectful because
A fellow by the name
I don't
of
like leaving
Gary
before it's.
Hoyle purchased $10,000.
And that is,
Sales receipt is still at the American Antiquarian Society. Yeah, it still exists. So,
Where is the other tusk?
the other tusk is the first tusk that I showed you is at the Hudson Museum up at Barnum at the University of Maine. So,
what was the label on that one?
it came from Alaska.
Alaska.
Yeah. Yeah, we had one from Alaska and one from Scotland.
Were they carbon dated like around the same time or were they different?
I don't think the big tusk has been radiocarbon dated, actually. As far as I know, I talked with the curator, she never mentioned if they have done any radiocarbon dating on that tusk. And Hal passed away about 3 years ago now. But Hal didn't feel compulsion to date the tusk because we didn't know exactly where it came from in Alaska. All it has is just Alaska. And they're still finding a lot of tusks up in Siberia and in parts of Alaska to this day. And it costs a lot of money to get radiocarbon dating done, especially the way they do it now, because it's very high precision work that they use. They use a different type of system they used to use, which gives a much cleaner, more significant and accurate date.
Tell them what year we got stuck.
What's that?
The year that the tusk was found.
Oh, the tusk ended up being 13,800 years old.
What year did you find the tusk in Scarborough?
Oh,
What
what
is
year
that
did I find it? Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
region.
It was in 1992. That's when we went to the site.
No, no, no. I just wanted you to tell them.
Okay.
Are they still proceeding with that dig? There must be so much there.
When I concluded my field work there, which I've got in the book, we had dug, the pond was 20 by 30 feet. By the time we get done digging there, the pond, that area was 120 by 60 feet. And we had dug in, I think about 6 feet deeper. So we found, I mean, it's possible there's still some scattered bones there somewhere, but we had such a big pit that we dug. And then, of course, we were required to canvass over to DEP, And they would oversee the reestablishment of the site again, so. And that was between the DEP and the landowner too. So I'm not sure exactly whatever happened to that, but I do know there is housing down in that area now, so I think it's developed. So whether there's still a pond there, I don't know. Just haven't been down there since.
How long did it take to dig? How long were you there?
We were there for 2 summers. Yeah, well, I say summers. The first year actually was in the fall, and we actually ended up transporting some of the soil up to the Augusta area because we didn't trust to leave it through the winter because too many people knew the mammoth remains had been found. And so we knew it was just a great place for souvenir hunters to pilfer the area. So we had to bring it up, and one of my people that was working with me at the time got one of these big construction screens for screening fine gravel, and we used that. We went through massive amounts of material to get the fragments, but out of those fragments, we could tell the story of the mammoth. We could tell when she died. We could tell how old she was when she died. We could pretty well tell the time of year that she died. We could tell what happened to at least a portion of her body. Anyway, we actually found a barnacle on one of the rib fragments, a barnacle scar. And we also found a tooth mark that appeared to have been from a great white shark. So, yeah. So, anyway, interesting finds. Yes.
At the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that lots of institutions are interested in artifacts from Maine. Why is that?
It was our institution that was interested. We had just completed an exhibit hall, which was called Made in Maine. Okay, well, that was just chock full of artifacts that were specifically from Maine. And the archaeology hall was just about all Maine artifacts that were in there. So for me to work on an introductory hall, I felt it was really important to have Maine artifacts to draw people in. And we found one bone that somebody had out on Great Cranberry Island. Had been, they had thought that it came from a mammoth. There were several professional people that actually thought that it came from a mammoth. And so we were given this bone, and then I had, it happened to be an archaeologist that was in the museum at the time when I was laying these things out. And he was a specialist on faunal remains, animal remains. And he, Art Spies is his name. And Art looked at that and he said, "Oh, it's a nice whalebone." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, that's the ulnar from the flipper of a humpback whale." So, and we had gotten a radiocarbon date from that, and we thought this can't be right. It was for 1926, and come to find out, in 1926, see if I can find that in my. In 1926, there was a. There was a tsunami. Emptying put this in here. But there was an emptying of water from Bass Harbor of all places, and along the cranberries. And this was sent to me by a fellow up in Nova Scotia. He was doing some research, and he had documentation of this, that this occurred back in 1926. So it appears that this whale might have been stranded at that time, and that's what happened. They'll get stranded and die. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, you know.
So you're an artist, you're a retired historian, natural history. You're a writer. What is your project that you're working on now, or projects?
I've got a fiction piece that I've worked on for 10 years, and it's a fantasy science fiction thing that, of course, has dinosaurs. And of course, it happens part of it in Maine.
For those of you who don't know, Gary has a wonderful collection of dinosaur art in his repertoire that actually traveled. Didn't that go to Japan?
Actually, the one that was shown in the newspaper was in Japan at the Mori Prefecture Museum. The dinosaur fantasy work that I've done in the past actually toured it started at the exhibit actually started at the Boston Museum of Science. It was so popular. It wasn't just me, there were a number of other artists that were involved in this, but it was so popular that the Smithsonian and the National Science Foundation paid to have it tour the nation. So it toured the nation for 3 years. So I was just one of the fortunate artists to be in that show.
Was that the Jurassic Park?
No,
No.
no, it wasn't. This was before Jurassic Park. This was back in the 82, maybe? Yeah, I think.
One
it
of
was
our kids was obsessed with dinosaurs, so anything to do with that.
around-
We were in.
Oh, really? Well, I did work on one of Jack Horner's projects. I mean, Jack Horner was the science advisor for the Jurassic Park movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so the Harvard Museum of Natural History.
Yeah. So anyway, it's all been fun.
And Mel, you said that you have some of his work at the Gilley?
We have, he was pretty awesome. We had a new display up and a bunch of decoys as a part of the exhibit. And we needed something on the wall, and so the director, Sean, called Gary and just to see what his, what he thought, where we could possibly do this or what we should have. And he said, I'll paint you something. He's like, well, we need it. No problem. Wow. He says.
Well, I got lucky.
That's the way the conversation was related.
I got lucky on that one. I mean, I had an idea that fit
The
in with what they
museum got
were.
lucky on that one for sure. So yeah, so it's not currently on display because those decoys have gone, but it's in our permanent collection and it will come back on display again.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Absolutely.
I have several copies of his book for sale if you want to purchase one. And they are just back there. So thank you very much.
If you do want to purchase one, I'd be glad to sign it.